When you think that certain regions can do no worse, the old adage, when you hit rock bottom, you start digging. Well, CONMEBOL just did that tonight. According to the rules, you cannot have more than 2 CONMEBOL teams in the same group. You couldn't have more than 3 CONCACAF. What ends up happening? You have 3 CONMEBOL group teams in Group A, and then after the draw is completely finished, oh snap, we forgot the playoff teams need to go elsewhere. So the draw's done, and many in media will start putting this out. I hope many in media start putting it out, where at one point you had Group D with Bolivia in it, then all of a sudden CONCACAF 6 ends up being in it. And the draw's done, so they're like flipping it around. It ends up being inconceivable that this is something that still happens. The last time I saw it was back it was a draw that was done here in South Florida. It ends up always, for some reason in South Florida, things end up kind of going haywire because Miami. That's another story for another time. But it ended up happening, it was I think a Gold Cup or something along those lines. I don't remember where all of us, it was a CONCACAF Champions League where the draw ends up going one way, all of a sudden say, hey, by the way, no, this doesn't work, and they had to do the draw all over again. Okay? It's inconceivable that a draw ends up having teams switched around back and forth after it's all done, after it's made official, after it's apparently complete. That's number one. It ends up being a very, very easy ride for Argentina to get to the final, at least. It ends up being a very torturous religious experience for everyone on the other end of the bracket, because you have the U.S. and Uruguay. I'm not saying the U.S. is going to win it. Many will probably say that the U.S. is the super team or the great team or whatever team that many think that they actually think they have in the U.S. I don't know, whatever. And then you have Brazil, Colombia, and then, of course, the CONCACAF playoff 6 team. If I'm not mistaken, that's either Costa Rica or Honduras. Regardless, it ends up being a tough end of the bracket. Argentina end up getting Chile and Peru, both who don't have coaches. And then CONCACAF 5. Now, that ends up being quite the interesting set of circumstances. Mexico, of course, on the other end, you have the other super team in Mexico, who ends up, whenever big tournaments arise, the hype ends up increasing. I don't know. They end up being an interesting situation when it all is said and done. But the draw ends up being embarrassing. I'm not saying for the matchups. I'm just saying from the perspective of what ends up playing out in terms of it was Mexico, Ecuador, Argentina, Jamaica. Jamaica is an up and coming. Jamaica. Excuse me. I said Bolivia. Jamaica was in Group D at one point, and it switched to CONCACAF 6. Don't ask me why. Let me talk about the tournament just in general. You know what I'm saying? Group A, Argentina should go through. There's just no doubt in my mind that Argentina would end up advancing into the next round. Regardless of who ends up playing, I think it would be either Canada or Trinidad and Tobago. As much as, Andre Sokolow's a good friend of mine, Trinidad's not going to go through. Canada, if they end up being the team that advances, I don't see them getting past Argentina. They might end up being the team that accompanies Argentina, maybe. Chile, of course, basically with a team that is in dire straits, and Peru the same thing too. I don't know. So that's why I end up picking Canada. Out of the least convoluted, out of the least complicated, well, Canada's the one. Many of you fans in Canada might be saying, what? What are you saying? What are you thinking? Huh? It's that bad on the other end. So the grass is a little bit browner on the other end of the spectrum if you start looking at them from a more, of course, Canada is still maybe looking to see if they can end up getting a full-time coach as well. You know, it ends up being tough. So, I mean, like Group A, what did I say? Well, Peru doesn't have a coach. Chile doesn't have a coach. Canada has an interim in Mauro Biello. Are they going to have a full-time coach when things resume and when the playoffs do come? Keep that in mind. Like I said, Mexico, Venezuela, and probably I've completely forgot. Of course, just trying to keep the notes here. To me, it's Mexico, Venezuela, Ecuador. Do not be surprised. Do not be surprised one bit if Mexico don't come out of that group. Do not be surprised. I'm not saying they aren't, because part of the business is to keep Mexico alive. But do not be surprised, because this is a very difficult group. Now, when you start putting them next to Argentina, it ends up being not so difficult. So keep that in mind. Jamaica ends up being a very tough team for any of these sides. And even if you start getting into situations where there are a lot of draws, the team that ends up getting the win, obviously, that win ends up being such a monumental difference for everyone else, they start to play catch up a little bit more. Group C, the U.S., Uruguay, Panama. I can't see the U.S. and Uruguay not getting through, although Panama could give, especially since the U.S. and Uruguay end up playing last. So you'd end up having the possibility of seeing those two teams face off to win that group. Panama ends up being the thorn in the side for both the U.S. as well as for Uruguay. Group D, Brazil. I don't know how Brazil's going to be. Carlo Ancelotti or not, I don't know. We have to see how Brazil... Now, like I say always, as of right now, they look very confused. They look all out of sorts. Now, if Carlo Ancelotti does arrive, how do things change? And things have to change quick in Brazil. Now, if they do change for the positive, now start adding Brazil to that list of contenders to be able to overthrow Argentina. It would be just absolutely monumental, epic to be at Hard Rock Stadium in that final to see Argentina-Brazil in a Copa America final. Be in the rafters, be up on top of that roof at Hard Rock Stadium to be able to see that match. It will be just monumental. We shall see. Paraguay, I don't know. Paraguay just struggling mightily. Costa Rica struggling mightily. Honduras struggling mightily. Although, if there is, out of those three teams, if there is a semblance of potential going forward, it ends up being Honduras. Crazy as it sounds. I don't see much from anyone else outside of that. Now, when I'm saying Honduras, I'm talking about potential from after Copa America going forward. And then finally, of course, the draw just ends up disappointing. But for the most part, it ends up being, well, how things in this part of the world are arranged. It's all about trying to enjoy the football at this point, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that we can do it. I hope that you can too. You know the drill. Subscribe, like, do your thing, ladies and gentlemen. Leave whatever comments, and I'll be glad to answer them. Talk to you soon.